Okay, yeah. So reasoning by transitivity, that's the one where it goes P arrow R, and then the conclusion is P arrow R. Isn't that reasoning by transitivity? But like I said, I want to extend it and then also add to it, so to speak. Yeah, what I mean by that is actually this reasoning by transitivity one is not limited to necessarily just two statements. If you follow, you kind of chain things together, P arrow Q, Q arrow R. Well, I can add a third premise to this very easily, because if I start here with the R on the next line here, and then go R arrow S, I can add to the chain there and keep it going, and then of course keep that one going. So if I wanted to add another one, what would it be? S arrow T, okay, and you get the idea. Now let's just stop right there and talk about the conclusion. So if I do that, what do you think the conclusion would be? P arrow T. Yeah, just like we said last time. If I look at this, it's really P arrow, first one here, arrow the last one. And so in this case, I've got the first is P, and then the last part of the premises is the T. So yeah, P arrow T. So if you chain them together like that, you can just keep this going all day long or whatever. But wherever you stop, it's P arrow the first, arrow the last. Okay? All right. Now to alter it just a little bit, what if I had P arrow not Q? What would the next line start with? I want to do transitivity. Would the next line start with not Q? Yeah, you can throw in some negations there. So we've got not Q arrow R, and then R arrow not S. What's the conclusion there? P arrow not S. So yeah, if we have negations like that, as long as you keep the chain the same, whatever you stop here with, you start with on the next line. As long as you keep that chain going, you can do a lot of different things. Now, let's talk about this one. There. Okay, so tell me what's wrong here with this picture. Well, for one thing, if I just went with the first arrow of the last, I get S arrow S, and if S, then S, that really doesn't make sense, and it wouldn't be right anyway. Why wouldn't it be right to do that? This arrow, that. Well, it's not chained together, right? Because here I've got S arrow Q, and this line starts with P. What does it need to start with if it's going to work? It would have to start with Q for this to. So what I'm going to do here is rearrange a little bit these premises and get a valid conclusion. Once I do that, we're going to rearrange the premises to get a valid conclusion. Okay, well, there is going to be a couple of small issues here. Well, I should have left one of those at least up there. Erased them all. Well, let me just point out here. Let me just put another one. All right, so this one's good. P arrow not Q arrow S, S arrow not R. Okay, and that leaves me P arrow not R. Okay, so that one's a good one, and we get a nice conclusion there. What I would point out to you is this. Just looking at the premises here, the one I start with on the premises and the end statement on the premises, notice that the other statements, besides that one and then the end one, the first one and the end one, notice that the other statements, there's two occurrences of each of those statements. I've got not Q or Q, the Q statement, not Q statement twice. I've got the S statement twice. So does it stand to reason that when I put these, rearrange these, I want to start with the statement that has, or one of the statements that have only one occurrence. So would I want to start with S here? Why not? Because there's two of the S statements, you see. I want to start with one of them that has one occurrence. Which one might I start with then? Start with this one, right? This one is P arrow not Q, and that's the only P statement there is. So I could start with this one, or what else could I start with? I could start with this one, couldn't I? Because there's only one R statement. It's not R, but okay, you with me? All right, so let's start with this one. P arrow not Q. All right, and that leads us to our next concern here, because for this chain reasoning by transitivity to work, what does this line need to start with? It needs to start with not Q. Do I have a statement that starts with not Q? No, I don't. However, I have this one. And what we can do with that one is a little thing we call the contrapositive. What does the contrapositive do to a statement? It flips and negates it, and the significant other thing about that is the contrapositive is equivalent to it. It's the exact same logically equivalent statement. So if I flip and negate this, so if I'm going to do this one and do the contrapositive, and why does that help me? Well, that makes it what? Not Q, arrow, not S. And doesn't that fit nicely into our little argument form there? Because, yeah, that puts it, now it starts with not Q, which is what I need here on this line. Okay? All right, so I've done this one, I've done this one, that leaves that one. So what goes here? Well, this line needs to start with not S. Uh-oh, this one starts with not R. What do we have to do? Do the contrapositive again, aren't I? So let's do the contrapositive of that third statement, and that would be, what would the contrapositive of that be? Flip and negate. So this flips and becomes not S. What happens here? Because you negate the not R, you get R. So what's the conclusion? P, arrow, R. All right. Now, we said when we started, so that is a valid conclusion. Said when we started, start with one that has one occurrence. We said we could start with this one, but we also said we could start with this one. What if we started with that one? Well, let's redo this whole thing. Not R, arrow, S. What would go next if I did that? Well, then I would put this statement as is, right? Because I needed to start with S. S, arrow, Q. So that's using this one and this one. So I must need to use this. What would go next? Well, the next would be not this one because I needed to start with Q. So what would I do? Contrapositive. Do the contrapositive of this, what would I get? Q, arrow, not P. So if I do it that way, what's my conclusion there? Not R, arrow, not P. Now, considering those two things, how do you explain that? Why do I get two different answers? How can I get two different answers? They're contrapositive answers, aren't they? The answer's the same, it's just one's the contrapositive of the other, you see. Okay, so it doesn't matter which one you start with, you will get the same answer, you'll just get the contrapositive in one or the other. Okay? All right. So, with that being said, here's what we're going to do with this next. Any do do basically the same thing, but this one is starting with words. Words, inner statements. Got next one? Okay. Yeah, how many, has anybody ever heard of Lewis Carroll? Who's Lewis Carroll? Alice in Wonderland and other writings. But a lot of his stuff actually has to do with logic and statements. Some of the crazy things that they say. Actually, logically speaking, they make sense, and so you just have to kind of follow the logic, and that's where this handout, the example, comes from. Is some of his type of writing, but here's what we've got on the handout: transitive argument example. We've got 4 statements. P is he is going to a party. Q, he brushes his hair. So P, he's going to a party. Q, brushes hair, for reference. R is he looks fascinating. And S is he is untidy. Okay. Strange statements, but that's what we got. All right. So here's the thing. We're going to take A, which is all men that brush their hair look fascinating. That's where we start. Okay, and then B and C, we'll do those here in a second. What I want to do is write each of these, A, B, and C, in if-then form, which is something we did last time. And notice this, the first one is an all statement, and the second one's a no statement. We can change all statements and no statements to if-then statements. That's what we're going to start with, okay? All right. Then we're going to rearrange them and give a conclusion that yields a valid argument. So that's what we were just talking about, rearranging the premises, reasoning by transitivity. Okay? With me on that. All right, so how would I write this in if-then form? If what, then? If he brushes his hair, then he brushes his hair. Okay? Okay, now, what would that be written in symbols then? Remembering the symbols here. Brushes his hair, that's the Q, right? Fascinating, that's the R. So if he brushes his hair, then he looks fascinating. Isn't that Q arrow R? With me on that? Okay. So A there is Q arrow R. B states no one that is untidy looks fascinating. Okay, so what happens on that? We talked about this last time as well. What about the no statement? How am I going to write that? One way you can do it, the way I typically try to show you, is that I've got the untidy and I've got the looks fascinating. If you put the no part with the last part, and then set it up in this if-then form, that is a proper way of doing it. So, if one is untidy, or if he is untidy, I guess is the way the statement goes. If he is untidy, then what? Does not look fascinating. Fascinating. Put the no part with the looks fascinating part. All right, so if I do that, then what is the symbol? He is untidy is S. Arrow does not look fascinating. That would be the not R. Okay, so C, men that go to parties always brush their hair. I don't know if that's true, but we'll go with it. All right, men that go to parties always brush their hair. What would that be in the if-then form? If he's going to a party, then he brushes his hair. Okay? All right. Well, what does that fit into our symbols as? Going to a party, that's P. Brushes his hair, that's Q, so it's P arrow Q. So here's my statements. Q arrow R, S arrow not R, P arrow Q. So those are my three statements. So then the next step is rearrange those and see what the valid conclusion will be. All right, so let's the three here. We'll need to rearrange, right? Because I don't want to start with Q because I've got two Qs, I've got two R's, so which one do you want to start with? S. Okay, we could start with S. There's one of it. S arrow, not R. Start with that one. Then where? Well, we need the next line then to start with not R, so I can use this one, the top one, do the contrapositive, so that would be not R, arrow, not Q. And then, last but not least, then, use the last one, flip and negate it, contrapositive, not Q. Conclusion, S, arrow, not P. But now we need to state that in our words, so what would that be in the words? If he is untidy, then he's not going to a party. P is not his party, so not P is not party. All right. Okay? All right. So that's our conclusion. Is there another one, though? Yeah? If I started instead with the P arrow Q, I would get P arrow Q, then I would have Q arrow R, and then last but not least, do the contrapositive of that one, be R arrow not S. So it's another valid conclusion would be P arrow not S, which is if he is going to a party, then he is not untidy. Contrapositive of that. The first one. Okay? All right. Questions or concerns?